Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm your host today, Steve Francisco. You know, one of the things that occurs when we do this program is sometimes we have to improvise. And today's show is Exhibit A in improvisation. My guest today is going to be somebody whose face is very familiar to those of you who watch our program regularly. It's our regular host, Alan Miller. Welcome, Alan.
Well, welcome to you.
And he's normally used to asking the questions, so today he's in the hot seat and he gets to receive the questions.
I have to say that we were very lucky a few months ago that Steve agreed to come on and do some hosting here. After 15 years, it's time for a new face to show its presence, and he really is so competent, and his background is so varied and knowledgeable to boot that it's been a pleasure to have him come in and start hosting some of the shows.
This is going to sound like the Mutual Aid Society today, Alan, because I have to say, you know, I was very flattered when you asked me to take on some of these responsibilities and host some of the shows, but it's really, I don't know if folks really understand how much fun it is to do this show too. We have a great crew of people. Tell us about the crew who help you produce this show.
Okay, we have an all-volunteer outfit. Which is not to say that the people with Eagan TV haven't given us a lot of help. But the fact of the matter is we have volunteers who've been with us for years, Dwayne Brucehaber and Mary Dahlke, and then we have a crew from Minneapolis Community and Technical College who are studying cinema, and what they're doing is building their resumes by putting television competency, and they are very competent. All our camera people today and the control room as well. We have students who are on an internship, and without them we wouldn't have a show.
That's right, and some of the very same people that are helping us produce this show today, running the cameras and running the technical aspects of the show, they could very well be doing this very same type of work at WCCO or one of our commercial stations, or maybe even a network someday. You never know.
The thinking is, when they graduate, for instance, Jarrett Braun is on camera 2. He wants to become a director. There's some question as to whether a studio is going to tap him on the shoulder and ask him to become a director. But the fact of the matter is that he very likely could get an interim job with an advertising agency and work on copy and work into it like that. And of course, his brother Josh is directing today. We have Scott Miller, who's really a yeoman. He's about 4 weeks off in operation, and he's back in harness here today, and along with Mary and Dwayne, we make up a crew, and that really makes the program go.
It does, and we should say too, for people who may watch this show and wonder, where do we record this? Tell the folks where we're at.
We are in the loft. No, we're
in the basement.
I am remiss if I don't say that Sharon has worked with me.
That's right.
Throughout on this, and does a lot of the work
Alan's
and
wife,
does a
Sharon
lot of
Miller.
the work with the volunteers,
Yeah.
and is an integral part of what we're doing. We're in the Thomson Reuters building. For years, we were Burnsville-Egan Television. Then Burnsville decided to divorce us, and we were fortunate enough with Rick King, the COO, here at Thomson Reuters, getting together with our former city administrator, Tom Hedges, and they formed a public-private partnership which has been mutually beneficial to both organizations, and also of great financial benefit to
Right.
both organizations. Thomson Reuters is one of our sponsors, and the other one, the first sponsor that we had, is U.S. Federal Credit Union, Bill Raker, who's a good friend.
And has been a guest on the show.
He's been a guest on. I try to have the sponsors on once a year, but Bill was the first one to come on board, and we met, I guess, 15 years ago, and have become close friends. And for a while, he was the sponsor, and then Thomson Reuters took over when we came over here, and we had the both of them. It gives us seed money to get jerseys like I have on now, and
And that the crew
the
wears,
cups,
right.
and the once-a-year party for the volunteers, things like that. And every once in a while, Rick will throw us a bone and give us the Thomson Reuters suite at the Twins game. And
There are
it's
some
been-
perks. Yeah.
It's been very good.
Yeah. Alan, I've known Alan for, what is it, Alan? I want to say it's over a decade. It's been about since I moved back here, about 2003, after living out in the East for a long time in D.C. But this is a really remarkable person in terms of some of the experiences he's had. One of the things, Alan and I are both lovers of politics, all things political. We are what you might call political animals. We study politicians, we talk to them, we've worked on campaigns. Alan, it turns out, lived in New York on Long Island and actually has quite a bit of political history in New York. Tell us briefly about some of the famous figures you met while working in New York politics.
Well, it started right after the Revolutionary War, and
Maybe
well,
not quite that far
maybe not
back.
quite that far back. But during the time, I worked my way up in Democratic politics to become what was called an assembly district leader. And under the Nassau County leader, Jack English, who was very close with the Kennedys. So we had a chance to meet both Kennedys and the governors of New York. You name the New York politician.
So
And
people
there-
like Hugh Carey,
who was a Long Island resident also.
Right.
And
the mayors of New York knew perhaps John Lindsay, even though he was a Republican. He was a
well,
liberal
we
Republican.
Saw him, we met him, but
Yeah.
you know, the late John Lindsay, but he wasn't close to us. But we did in terms of our state officials and things like that. So
Bella Abzug, some people
Well-
might remember the famous Bella Abzug, who was known for wearing broad-brimmed hats
remember
as
her,
member
she
of
just
Congress.
passed away very
Yeah.
recently. And yeah, I would see Bella at conventions, at you know, events that we would have statewide.
Many
But-
progressives know the name too, Allard Lowenstein, and you knew Allard Lowenstein. Tell us your
Allard
story about that.
Lowenstein came from Long Beach. He was my congressman, and I actually had a fundraiser at my home, and the two attractions to bring people into the home to raise money for Allard, who unfortunately was assassinated, were at the time, far left John Voight, who has now moved to the far right, the father of Angelina Jolie, and Bill Bradley of the Princeton Star, who
First
became a
of-
New York Knick
right.
for many years. Yeah.
Basketball fame and
Yeah.
later U.S. Senator. Yeah.
Had another fundraiser, and I don't remember who it was for, in which Shirley MacLaine was the lead or the star to get us in. And she and I had an interesting exchange, because she took me aside and she put her hand on my arm and she said, "Where's the John?"
That was your big contribution
Yeah, that
to
was
Shirley
my- that was it,
MacLane's
yeah.
career. Yeah. Did you ever have the opportunity? You must have met the late famous Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Only peripherally, really. You probably met Moynihan a lot.
I met
more
him many times,
when
yeah.
you were working with Congressman
Right.
Bento than I did. But
I always thought Senator Moynihan, he was one of the most, I would argue he was probably the most intelligent person who ever served in Congress during the time I was out there. Not that I always agreed with him, I didn't, but I found him to be extremely intelligent. He was a Harvard professor. He had been a U.S. ambassador to India, appointed by Richard Nixon, interestingly enough, and something in Moynihan's background that would probably make a lot of conservatives shudder today. He actually proposed on behalf of the Nixon administration, you'll recall this, the first guaranteed national income as a way of fighting poverty. And of course, the idea didn't go very far, but he was a really extraordinary
politics
person.
was so different in those days than what it is today. We have people who are ideologues, and that's fine, but they will take the country down with them rather than do what their oath demands. And it has been really disappointing to me, having been in politics and now out of politics. This has been a great vehicle to get politicians from both sides. And we've had many, many from both sides, and judges and things like that. I mean, we are starting our 15th year now, and we've had 1,500 guests. We've had the opportunity to do some specials. We've had just about 60 players from the Twins, who we've interviewed at various times. We did a special from Fort Myers. Sharon was on camera for that one. She had never been a camera person before, but then we did one from Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans a year or two after the hurricane.
It's about
And
2006 or so
Yeah,
after that.
yeah.
Alan, one of the things in your background that I found pretty interesting too, tell us about where you were during the Persian Gulf War, or, well, Operation Desert Storm in 1991?
91, yeah.
You ended up in Israel, and tell us what was happening in Israel while this was going on.
Within, I guess, within 48 hours after the first Scud attack, I had cleared my credentials with press credentials with the Israeli embassy, and I was on a plane with a lot of American soldiers who were passing as Israeli Defense Forces, by the way, as they were setting up the first Patriot missile batteries. And it was interesting because, you know, when you hear a Southern drawl from a fellow who's wearing a T-shirt that says IDF.
You know they're not from southern Israel.
Yeah, it's about the size of it.
But people will recall, of course, during that time, it was a terrible time for the civilian population in Israel. You never knew when a missile was going to land. Missiles were shot into Tel Aviv and some of the other communities.
Actually, only, well, in Tel Aviv, they didn't touch Jerusalem because of the fact that it's a holy place. And they fell around Tel Aviv, but the warnings were worse than the attacks. I mean, you get off the plane and you get gas mask training, and then you're given a gas mask. And I named mine American Express because I wouldn't leave home without it. And literally, it went with you every place. And you're out in the street, and all of a sudden the sirens go off, and then it's running for what is a safe place. And actually, one person died as a result of a missile on a third floor, and I saw the apartment where he had lived, took the whole front of the building off. But I think 4 or 5 women suffocated because they didn't know how to adjust their gas mask to let in the oxygen. And the worst thing that happened to me over there was I was in a cab going to interview Nathan Sharansky, and we were in an accident at an intersection.
Oh, boy.
And that was as close as I came, but the scare factor is one thing, but actually there wasn't real danger. The Scud missiles were very inaccurate.
They were very crude and inaccurate.
Yeah.
And I remember myself watching the video on television, the news reports of the U.S. Patriot missiles intercepting these, but the Patriots weren't 100% effective, were they? Because as you said, a few of the missiles got by.
They weren't 50% effective either in those days. We're talking about 91.
Yeah, and the technology, as I understand now, far more advanced than what they had available
back then. As a matter of fact, they just took a missile down 2 days ago that was fired from one of the Palestinian areas.
So, Alan, you know, throughout the time you've been doing this show, you've gotten to meet some pretty interesting people, lots of politicians, as we discussed. Is there one guest that stands out in your mind? And I guess maybe I'd phrase the question to you this way. What's the most shocking thing anybody ever said to you on this show when you've been interviewing them?
I don't know that there's been anything shocking as such. People are careful. Congressman Klein used to be on all the time, but he took umbrage at the fact that I questioned when he wouldn't debate one of the Democratic candidates, and he hasn't been back since, but he was here about 30 times. He and I used to go at it because he insisted that there were weapons of mass destruction in terms of Iraq, and
of course, he wasn't alone in asserting that. The administration was saying it, and
he would say things like, "I know things that you can't know or you can't be part of, and believe me, it's real." Well, it wasn't real, and you know. But one of my favorite guests has been Pat Anderson, the former mayor of Eagan.
She's been on a number of times on the show. Former city council member.
Pat and I go hammer and tongs. Philosophically, we're far apart, but I really love her because she comes on and she is really a gentle person.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned Pat Allen because it seems like that's something we've really lost in our politics. I can tell you that when I was a freshman congressional staffer way back in 1982, we had friendships across the aisles. Members had genuine friendships and interactions across the aisle. And what I hear from my friends in D.C. on Capitol Hill now is you don't see that anymore. It's really a terrible thing for and it hurts the country.
On a national level, you don't see it. On a state level, you don't see it. On a local level, I have twin boys. When they were bar mitzvahed, when they became 13, the Republican leader of our area was Angelo Roncallo, who went on to become a Supreme Court judge on Long Island. Angelo was there. He gave my sons gifts, and several other of the Republicans from the Nassau County area were there because we had that type of a relationship.
I think at the national level, too, I think of, your story reminds me of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. You know, I was there in the early days of President Reagan's administration, and Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill didn't see eye to eye on very much other than agreeing that they were both Irish and they both liked to have a drink after work, but they could be sociable with each other and be friendly, but then disagree with each other. And I really think the country's kind of lost something by not having that ability for people who may have different perspectives on policy, not being able to talk to each other, not being able to work together for the common good.
The only place that I see it exist at all right now is Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, who are so far apart philosophically, and yet they are close friends. According to everything that I read on the Supreme Court.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they both are lovers of opera, and they socialize. And to me, that's what it should be, and it really isn't anymore.
So maybe a question is, how do we get back to that? What do we have to do to get back to that, where people start trying to work with each other again?
Number one, people have to educate themselves. We have a very lazy electorate. They will watch one television station. I don't want to mention Fox, but which unfortunately will distort the news or just lie about it.
Now, you know, a conservative would come back at you and say, well, the same could be said about MSNBC from their perspective.
Watch them both, as I do. Read the facts. read newspapers. I asked one of my classes last year, how many of you read a newspaper every day? One hand went up out of an entire lecture class. We're not doing that. We're living on sound bites, and where we have the internet and where we have all these technical advantages today, we are not taking advantage of them to really educate ourselves. We have diminished the social sciences, which is very important. We have diminished teaching history, which is very important, and the humanities. And until we get back to that, until we elevate really the knowledge of people, and perhaps the younger generation is going to do it, but especially because I see people on the right, don't take away my Social Security, keep government out of my life. But most of them have gray hair. And maybe it's when this generation passes that we can come to something meaningful. You take an oath of office, you should be ready to do what's necessary to protect your country. I mean, half of the people who are opposing Obama, and I am not happy with a lot that Obama has done, are doing it, no question, because he's black. They haven't adjusted to the fact that we have a black president. Hey, folks, wake up. Get used to it. He's trying to do good things. He's trying to give us, for instance, health care, the same as 138 other industrialized countries have, and we don't have. Shame on us.
Well, you know, we've talked about this healthcare issue on the show with a number of guests, interviews that both of us have done with different guests.
And we're going to have Dave Feinwax back.
Yeah, that's
soon.
right. A very interesting fellow. And one of the points I've always made, and you agree with this, I know, because we've talked about it, Congress or state legislatures never pass perfect laws. There's no such thing as the perfect law. There are probably going to be some adjustments that have to be made on healthcare law, but that doesn't mean that the answer is throw it all in the trash and throw it away when you have 30 million Americans who have not a penny of insurance coverage who could get new coverage. Otherwise, the alternative is we go back to the days when the insurance companies could kick you off for any pre-existing medical condition, didn't have to cover kids up to age 26 on their parents' policy. The insurance companies were able to impose lifetime limits on coverage so that when you hit that dollar figure, they could kick you off. And the Affordable Care Act says you can't do those things.
The fact of the matter is that this philosophy of controlling a woman's life, get out of a woman's vagina and get out of her reproductive organs. Let the woman and her doctor make decisions. You don't want government to control things, and yet you're telling people how they should live. This is ludicrous. We have 11 million people, children, who are going to bed hungry, according to the statistics. What a shame. What a crime that this country is not feeding its own. And then
in
they
Congress,
call back the SNAP.
Yeah, they wanted to, they just passed a bill, or in the House, they voted to separate the nutrition title from the rest of the Farm Bill, which politically, there's always been this accommodation that you had to have nutrition, namely food stamps, or what we now call SNAP, as part of the Farm Bill, because that would help you attract the urban voters and then the rural voters who wanted price supports that were part of the Farm Bill. And I know our Congressman John Klein voted against that too.
That's right.
I'm sorry, he voted for separating the nutrition title from the rest of it.
And then cutting the amount of money for people who don't have the money, who don't have the jobs, who, if we took care of them, would be the generation that could lead us on. And that really would, it's a criminal.
Alan, before we run out of time, too, I just want to ask you, I know that one of the things you enjoy most, in addition to doing this show, in addition to following politics and occasionally writing very strong opinion pieces to the editor, one of the things you like to do is teach. Tell us about some of the teaching that you've done and are doing.
Well, I've been teaching for, I guess, 40 years now. And I've taught in colleges, in universities, and in law schools, and at various times in my life. And what I love about teaching, and what I love about being at MCTC, for instance, is the fact that you get a chance to work with the generation that's coming up. And it's the give and take that's really very satisfying to me.
Students are really open-minded to new ideas, aren't they?
Most of them are, some of them aren't.
Some aren't. See, I identify with what you're saying because, as you know, I've done some teaching too. I've taught law for nonprofits at Hamline University as an adjunct professor over there. And it really is fun. There's something exciting about the dynamic of being in front of a classroom, engaging people in ideas and critical thinking, and you can literally see it when you look at students. You see their eyes change, and you can tell if you're connecting with
We're
them.
on the cusp of a new semester starting in 3 days, and I'm really looking forward to it. Again, because we will have fun, but we will learn, and I try to see that my classes do enjoy what they're learning. Be loose and go with them. They're the ones that are going to be taking this mess that we are leaving them with and trying to do something
trying to
about
make sense of it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is a challenge. Alan, one of the other things I know you and Sharon like to do, you like to travel and you like to collect art too. Tell us about some interesting places you've traveled to.
Well, thanks to Sharon, she has booked us some great trips. And to be in St. Petersburg, Russia on their 300th anniversary was extremely meaningful. And to be in Alaska and watch the icebergs calving and falling into the sea, things like that. But we've been very fortunate to do Europe pretty thoroughly, and Alaska, the Caribbean. I spent 2 wonderful weeks in Japan. This is years ago, in the 80s. And that's been a real benefit. The art just has happened. We sat in on an auction one time, and it was addictive. So.
You and I share that love for travel. I grew up, my father was a mechanic for Northwest Airlines, so we were able to travel quite a bit when I was younger. And one of my favorite quotes, maybe you've seen this, the great American writer Mark Twain, who said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice and ignorance."
That's probably true.
And I think that's really true. When you travel the world and you visit other countries, I've been fortunate. I've been to, last count, I think about 21 or 22 foreign countries. And I always find that wherever I go, that people pretty much want the same things. They want a good future for their kids. They want their children to be safe, to have a better life, to have an education, to have a life that is meaningful. That's no different than what Americans want.
And to have the opportunity to go to Estonia, which was really wonderful, Croatia, places like that, places that I never dreamed I would get to. It's been really good. I've been very fortunate.
Well, we've been very fortunate, and the people of Eagan are fortunate that this television show has been here, as you said, going on to its 15th year. And we can do things on community cable television and in a way that perhaps the regular commercial stations wouldn't devote time to the kind of guests from the community, people who've done interesting things. So it's been a great run, and I think we're all in your debt for what you've done in pulling this crew together and producing this show so that we have a forum like this.
Well, thank you. And now you're going to enjoy some of the aggravation of a guest not showing up at the last minute.
It happens. We're flexible.
Yeah. Instead of doing 3 interviews, we'll do 2.
Yeah. Alan Miller, our regular host of Access to Democracy, thank you for being our guest today.
Steve Francisco, the future.